Liverpool Street, written and read by Chris Reddington. Camille puffed out her cheeks and took a step forward into the heat and noise of the coffee shop. She had stood there on the pavement deliberating for the last 5 minutes, and, against her better judgment, had stepped forward reasoning that now seemed as good a time as any. He was there, of course, sat as usual by the window, a coffee, probably his third, placed dead centre in front of him. Camille stopped in the doorway briefly, wiping the early morning rain from her coat before giving in to the rich, tempting smell of overpriced coffee that surrounded her. With a few delicate steps, she stepped past him toward the dogleg of people who were waiting patiently in the corner of the cafe. The length of the queue and the flustered family at its front meant that for a while at least she was out of his sight. As she stood there and looked at the booted, suited and bedraggled customers edging slightly forward, Camille mentally recited all the things she wanted to say. She stood there, silent and safe, amongst her polyester guardians, and whilst little ripples of conversation broke out amongst the waiting customers, Camille continued her recital, desperate to prove to herself that excuses and sheer avoidance would never solve the problem that was sitting by the window. Her stomach was churning, her heart pounding. Desperately, she tried to distract herself with her phone, checking the messages from her dad before scrolling through her Facebook feed and wishing the life she presented there was accurate. Eventually, the barista's warm face cut through the vintage gloom and electric light, forcing Camille to order. The words Americano fell out of her mouth through sheer habit, when in truth she had wanted a hot chocolate. Nevertheless, she paid and, clutching her steaming mug, slowly walked towards the window, arriving at his table as he turned to face her. "Ah, Camille, you're late. You really should get a smartwatch." "It was a tube," she lied. "Delay at Waterloo." "Well, that is unsurprising. The amount of people who get on for free nowadays, and the sheer lack of investment into the sector is appalling. I was saying to a friend the other day that, in my opinion, more should be done to improve roads around London. More people should drive instead of catching buses, underground railways, and God knows what else. You would like to drive, wouldn't you, Camille?" Camille sighed and recounted to herself the hundreds of times that her and Darren had been over this. "I can't afford the lessons, Darren, let alone the car and—" "Well, yes, there is that. But I bought you the guidebook. It's easy, isn't it? And once you drive, you'll be able to get into your workplace so much quicker. And we can go out for meals with my father in the country. You'd like that, wouldn't you, Camille?" Camille wanted to roll her eyes, but resisted, resigning herself to explaining one last time why her bank account wasn't bursting at the seams. "Darren, I said I can't afford it. You know work just isn't paying at the moment, and I've had enough trouble trying to help Dad sort Mum's stuff out." Darren, though, wasn't listening. He barreled on, words tumbling out of him like water down a fall. He smiled with each sentence. His voice grew in volume until he was speaking almost to the whole cafe. Camille fought the urge to sink into her chair like normal, determinedly remaining upright, staring straight at him. After a few minutes, Darren stopped to lift his spoon and sip his coffee. Camille saw her chance, and gathering all of her strength, jumped in, desperately cutting into his pause. "Darren, I want to talk about us." Darren smiled and attempted to pat Camille on the hand. Shocked, Camille quickly drew it away and, her voice now shaking in anticipation, continued. "Darren, I really like you, but—" It was too late. Darren had already begun speaking, this time with that thick layer of patronization that she swore he saved just for her. "My darling, I know just what you're thinking. Marriage is the next step for a couple such as ourselves, and I completely agree. I was simply waiting until the end of the financial year to make the arrangements." Camille stopped, aghast at the very notion of his arrangements. No doubt he had had a spreadsheet on his laptop, detailing the exact cost of everything from his suit to the table decorations. She shuddered to think of his assistant, nervously preparing cost forecasts and researching appropriate venues for him. Darren, I'm not here to talk about marriage. In fact, quite the opposite, Darren. It's not working. But Darren didn't hear. He didn't even see her rifle through her handbag for a tissue. He just looked down towards his coffee, stirring incessantly and talking as if to save his life about how his colleague had suggested a civic centre as the perfect, modest venue. Her tears were now blinding her, and looking back up at him, she hoped he would show some sort of emotion, or at least try to convince her that what she was saying was the wrong thing. But he didn't. Camille dried her eyes, hoping the minimal makeup she was wearing was not damaged beyond repair, and looked up at him. As she did, she remembered every time she had tried to be heard, tried to be anything more than a commodity to him. She saw the countless arguments, the fruitless meals, and the obligatory presents, and she knew, now more than she had ever done, that she could handle it no more. Darren, please, I beg you, could you just listen to me for once? She had snapped. She had not meant to, but her voice had carried across the cafe, and now his eyes were upon her. Camille, you know I don't like it when you take that tone. Your behaviour shocks me. Camille too had been shocked by her outburst, but Darren's response only infuriated her further. Oh yes, I always shock you. My manners shock you, my taste in wine, my fashion sense. The list is endless. In fact, Darren, what doesn't shock you about my person? At this, Darren's face flipped. The smile turned to its more common frown. Camille, knowing what was coming, began to gather her things, whilst he, in his most serious stage whisper, lectured her. For the last time in her life, Camille ignored him, letting her fury drown out his complaints about every part of her person, until all that was left was the drone of his voice. And the day I was also forced to ride the bus, which, if I may say so, was filthy, to your house for a meal that was, quite frankly, half-cooked. How I was expected to be pleasant is beyond me. Still not listening, Camille raised her hand and signalled for him to wait, to pause, just for a second, but he wasn't looking. He wasn't even aware she had moved. Darren, please! He continued, his words running straight through hers, not looking up, his hand constantly and consistently stirring. Camille wondered if what he was saying was important, if maybe the words rattling between his lips were strands of hope that she could cling to. But as his voice came into focus once more, it was clear all hope was lost. And of course, for someone like you, without much income, it is difficult to understand the complexity and stress of my situation, but it is crucial that I am not disturbed in the early evening. That was it. Camille had had enough. She could endure it no longer. Standing in a flash of anger, she slung on her bag, untied her umbrella and reached across the table, grabbing Darren by the arm. Darren jumped and glared at her, his stir interrupted in the 2 o'clock position. What on earth are you doing, Camille? Sit down. You are making a scene. I won't be seen with you like this. Camille raised herself up, gathered all the courage she could muster, and prepared herself to say the words that she knew would set her free. Darren, you've given me no choice. I'm leaving you. Darren laughed. You're joking, of course. Now sit down and we'll talk about us. What are your opinions on floral arrangements? Darren, I'm not joking. In fact, I'm surprised you know what a joke is. She reached out to him one last time, not in anger, but in one last desperate attempt to connect her eyes with his. Gently, she touched him and said, Goodbye, Darren. Just as she was about to turn, Darren stopped and dropped his spoon, the coffee spilling over the edge of his cup in a little tsunami. He looked up at her, and for the first time she could see into his eyes, and within them something painful, deep, deep within. But it was too late. Camille turned and, as if guided by an invisible hand, walked quickly to the door. Feeling the eyes of the whole cafe boring into her back as she turned one last time. There he was, still and silent, watching her leave. She opened her umbrella, faced the traffic, and stepped out into the rain of Liverpool Street.